and yeah, you can start anytime.
Okay. So credentials. So I'm an ordained Orthodox priest under the Patriarchate of Antioch and all of the East. And academically, I have a degree in basic humanities, a BA in basic humanities, summa cum laude, with a emphasis, a concentration really in religious studies. And I have a Master of Divinity from Asbury Theological Seminary, which is an evangelical Protestant school, and a second Master of Divinity from St. Tikhon Orthodox Theological Seminary. And I've been a priest since 2010.
Okay. So I guess my first question would be about the narthex, and just first off, what happens in there?
Okay. The narthex, it really represents the world. So if we think about how the Orthodox Church is separated, you have the narthex separating the world, and the nave, which is shaped like a ship. Um, that where the people of God stand. So the laity stand in the nave, and then the sanctuary of the altar is the place for the clergy. So the nave, or the narthex, is a space that is a transition from coming outside of the church into the church. So it's a place really where we try to remind ourselves that we're coming into a temple, right? And we begin our prayer. There's actually a prayer that can be done for entering into the church. Icons are in the narthex, and uh, usually boxes of sand where we can put our candles, and we pray for the living and the departed. Those candles are there for being a physical sign of our prayer, because in Orthodoxy we really uh, always try to remember that the spiritual life incorporates both the spiritual realm and the invisible, or the invisible realm and the visible realm, right? The physical and the non-physical. So we use our bodies a lot in worship, and that starts in the narthex. We bow down to icons, and we kiss them, or we make prostrations before the icons and kiss them. We light the candles. There's a lot of physicality that's there. Um, and after we venerate the icons and light the candle, we go into the church. So it's kind of this place of preparation for us. Traditionally, the narthex is also really the place for people who are not yet Orthodox. So, in fact, traditionally, it's a place for baptism. So you find baptismals in the narthex, and it's if people were under penance for some reason. In the Orthodox Church, excommunication means from communion. So traditionally, for example, if a person came from war and they had killed other people in war, even if it was honorable service to protect people, the church recognizes killing is not natural, right? So there would be a period of excommunication. And for us, the point of excommunication is recommunion. And the place for those people when they were under penance would be the narthex, and the place for catechumens would be the narthex. There's even a point in the service, not all churches say it, where the deacon will say, "Catechumens out, let no catechumen remain," right? And all the catechumens leave, and that's after the first part of the service with the prayers, then the reading of the epistle and the gospel and the sermon, and then the doors will be shut. And the deacons still in liturgy say, the doors, the doors will be shut. So it's really for people preparing to be Orthodox, or people not receiving communion, or but for those who are coming into the church, it's a place of preparation. And you'll see in some architectural forms, even like an outer narthex, kind of an outer porch, and then like an inner narthex as well. So sometimes it's even divided even more, but it's that place of preparation.
Here, so I'm gonna share my screen here
Okay.
of here. Let's see. Right. Okay. Can you see that?
Let me see. There it is. I see it.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is the narthex in Saint Sava.
Yes.
So right here, you just have this. Is in most churches is this very open as well, so that you can see into the nave.
Uh, it depends, and I don't know. They might have a a separate outer narthex there. I'm not sure what the architecture looks like. Uh, some are more open. I know a church that actually built an outer narthex. They were this open with a big cross-shaped baptismal font right in the middle of this area with columns that you could see through. And then later on, they built kind of an outer porch, or they had a port, like an actual porch, and they enclosed it to make it more of an outer narthex. So sometimes, you would see kind of an inner narthex like this, and then, even more of a separate space outside. But there's a lot of variation, in Orthodox architecture, but this is not unheard of, really, to have something like this. Of course, there are no doors, right? So,
Mhm.
uh, you know, so liturgically, you're not going to be shutting doors when you don't have any like this, but that's okay. And I think the function probably of this cathedral really is, it's about volume. It's about getting as many people probably in there as possible, right? And that's one reason that is beneficial for churches not to have chairs. And that's more traditional Orthodox churches to have no chairs. But even churches being built today, even though in America, many Orthodox churches put in chairs or pews because that's sort of an American thing. And you see that also in Orthodox churches in other parts of the world, like Middle East. But many churches now put removable chairs. And the benefit of that is that when you do have big feasts, which would draw a lot of people, especially like Pascha, that you could move those chairs out of the way and you would have all this space for people, to be in there. I'm not sure what the Serbian fire marshal says about having that many people in, but you can put a lot of people, and I think that's kind of the point, is it's you really get as a nation, it gives this symbol of sort of like, the nation being an Orthodox country and being able to gather everybody together.
Um, and speaking about the nave and not having any chairs there, just right here, you can see all that room. So what is the in Orthodoxy? What's the difference really between having this kind of cross and square shape versus like a basilica? Yeah, what's the use of having it like this?
Well, uh, the basilica, my understanding is the basilica really came into church use because those were the first church buildings that we publicly used when we came out of persecution. Right, so the basilica style was really a secular building, and became a church building. So, and a feature that you'll find in churches, of course, with basilica style, this long style, right, with arches, um, and symbolically, I mean, arches, at least in the old world, had a function, right? Perhaps I imagine a load bearing function, but today sometimes those are just symbolic. But there is this symbolic nature of an arch, because for us the circle represents heaven and the square represents earth, and it's really this union of circle and square, right? So theologically it helps. And also we say that the arches teach us how to pray because they stand up, right? And in Orthodox churches, typically the posture of prayer is standing, right? Unless we're doing prostrations, we're standing. So in basilicas, you have the apse, the half dome at the front, and that's really become a feature of Orthodox churches. And you can fit a lot of people in. You get a sense of height sometimes, and you can fit a good number of people in basilicas, especially if you have multiple rows, outward. At our church at St. George in Houston, we expanded the church and put extra rows on the sides, so we still have a basilica style. Now, uh, one of the things about having a cross shaped, and there are different kinds. There's sort of like an equilateral cross shape, right? And then there is sort of a basilica style. That's kind of what we have in some of our churches, is a kind of a basilica style, but then you have crosses at the top, um, and the function of some of those side areas, like the transept beams of a cross, would be to house a choir. So if you go to St. George, you would see a chanter stand on one side and a choir on the other, or you could have antiphonal choirs, right, to do antiphons, which is traditionally like a right choir and a left choir to sing back and forth. So it helps, and you can also have side chapels. You can do a lot with that side area, but especially it's good for music, right, for choirs. But again, you can find little side chapels and things like that that can be used for, confessions or whatever.
Okay, so
And I will add, I think this church, if I remember correctly, is based on Hagia Sophia,
yeah, it is.
right? And so, the Hagia Sophia is a church that is sort of, it's really the main church for the Orthodox world, really, right? It was in the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. So it has a lot of symbolism for us, even though it was a museum for a long time. I think it's been turned back into a mosque by the Turks. So to have a Christian church that's really shaped like Hagia Sophia, it brings with it like all of this history, and it really brings with it this sense of uh, for the Serbians probably of being, again, like an Orthodox country, right? And also it's dedicated to Christ, because Hagia Sophia, it's sometimes translated as Saint Sophia, which is not. Technically, it can be Saint Sophia because Agios is saint and Sophia is Sophia, but it's really holy wisdom. Agios is holy and Sophia is wisdom, so it's dedicated to Christ Himself, the wisdom of God.
Um, Here at the altar.
Mm-hmm.
So I see that in a lot of churches they have this kind of raised area before the altar. Is that just a kind of stylistic choice to have everyone be able to see the priest, or is it symbolic in some way?
Well, the Solea is a little bit different in the Greek tradition and the Slavic tradition. So in and when I say Greek, really, you could say the Eastern Roman tradition. So it was Antiochians. Antioch, it's in Syria, but Antioch was a Greek city, right? It was the queen of the East. It was a Roman city, and just like Alexandria in Egypt, it was one of the great Greek cities, great Roman cities. So those of us that were in the Eastern Roman Empire, Greeks and Antiochians and the others, we are sometimes have some differences in even like liturgics. We have and even like the shape of our vestments. There's some difference between us and the more Slavic churches like the Russians and Ukrainians and Serbians. And it's the same liturgy. And I've served in a Serbian church. Like I went to a Russian seminary, so it's essentially the same. But you'll see in Antiochian Greek churches that marble area is much larger, because on that area we do we do weddings on that platform, and even though baptism is traditionally done in the narthex historically, or in another building, in another chapel or something, we often would do baptisms practically on the Solea, and a lot of the mysteries of the church or those sacraments are performed on the Solea. So and we have a lot of altar servers there, so it's just much bigger than what you would see. When I went to seminary at a Russian seminary, you also didn't have a marble area that's big, but it does sort of create, some space. What you often see is a large, what's called the solea, the big marble area, and then those three steps that go up to the doors there in front of the altar, and that's called the ambon. There's kind of that area above the three steps, and here is just a little bit different, but it does create some sense. You sort of have this progressive sense of getting closer to the altar, right? Um, and it's sort of like the Old Testament temple. You have like the outer courtyard. Well, really, if you look at the temple in Christ's day, you have this huge area proportionally called, it's the court of the Gentiles. Anybody can go in the court of the Gentiles, right? And then you have like the court of women, and then we go through the court of women, and then there's and women were there, and then you have the court of Israel, like where the men could be, and then you have this delineation where the priests are, where the altar is, right, the burning altar, and then there's then the other like actual building in which inside of it is the holy place and the holy of holies, right? So you kind of do see this progressive change in space to get to the altar, and that marble sort of creates a kind of a buffer in some ways, right, between the nave and the altar space, as does the iconostasis, the icon screen.
Okay, with about iconostasis. So in the Western Rite Church, in those that I've been to, a lot of time, like I've seen that they are more open. You don't have the icons making more of a screen. It's just kind of more open. So what is the point of having it so closed off, the altar?
Yeah, icon screens are very different wherever you go, and because some are open so that you see through the icons, you can see between the icons. Uh, some churches, some churches are very open. Sometimes, especially in chapels or in, like, say, mission churches. When I do liturgy at the school, for example, I have like one big icon of Christ and one icon of the Theotokos, and that's my iconostasis, right? So they really do vary. In the Slavic tradition, you often see, especially in Russia, you'll see like rows and rows of icons, like at this huge wall, like it's very, very tall, And if we really go back to the early church, what's important is this just separation of space, right? There's a separation, but that makes a distinction in the space between the altar. And over time, especially I think after the restoration of the icons, after the period of iconoclasm, in which icons were destroyed and removed from the churches, when we brought icons back into the churches, we did it in a big way. So the purpose of that, iconostasis means icon screen. So the function of that screen is really just to hold the icons, and those icons are usually normally in a predictable pattern in churches. So in the West, you will see that the altar space is separated usually by like a kneeling rail or some low rail. That was probably the case in the East. You probably did not have something originally like older as elaborate as the icon screen. It's sort of one of these things. Over time, the screen just becomes kind of more elaborate, right? To where it's just probably easier to build a wall, and especially in a very large church, to build something like that can hold the icons easily. But in the West, you have that kneeling rail or some kind of rail to separate the altar. And then you would have, in some churches, a choir. It's my understanding the choir were basically like regarded as servers, like tonsured servers, right? So they were inside the space between the altar, not in the altar area, but there was this thing called a rood screen. And a rood screen is sort of like a screen without icons in it. If you imagine like the wood screen that's open where you can see through it, the rood is the cross, ROOD. So the purpose of the rood screen is really to hold the cross. and it's my understanding that you would have like the nave and then a rood screen and a choir and then another separation. So it really developed a little bit differently in the West. Um, the icon screen is really sort of unique to the East. I mean, it developed that way in the East, and in the West, um, you still have the kneeling rail, and then in some places at least the screen without icons.
Okay, and with these icons and the apses, yeah, do they have any symbolism being there, or is it just yeah?
Yeah, the icons are there to remind us of the presence of the reality that our hearts are too dark to see. Right. So, uh, for us, when we worship, heaven and earth meet, right? And all the saints, the archangels, the angels, all the angelic beings are present with us and worshiping with us when we're together. And I mean, for those of us whose hearts cannot see that reality, the icons are there to remind us of that. The icons are also there to remind us of salvation history, right? So some of the icons are reflections of certain events in salvation history, and normally, I mean, you'll have the icons of the Theotokos there above the altar in that apse. You see that here, sort of in the shorter apse, and the icon of the Theotokos and of Christ is one that reflects the truth that Christ is a human being and the uncreated God at the same time. So that's the message, that if you understand the icon that you see, the Virgin Mary is seen, as the throne of the King. He's sitting on her as a throne. So that is often in the apse, usually the Theotokos with Christ. And then in the dome, if there's a round dome, you often will have the icon of Christ blessing, and really that is the appropriate icon of the Father, right? But if you've seen the Son, you've seen the Father, and the Son is the image of the invisible God, right? As the Scripture says. So sometimes you will see, especially in later Orthodox art, you will see the image from the Old Testament prophets of God, and with a big white beard and a white hair, and sometimes that's identified with Christ, and sometimes identified with the Father. It's really not. It's hard to say it's really an icon of the Father as much as it's an icon of this. It's really an icon of an icon. It's an icon of this image of the Father that is revealed to the prophet in the Old Testament, sort of an icon of a vision. But really, most correctly, Christ is the image, and this is called the Pantocrator, which is the Almighty. So it gives us sense of Almighty God blessing from above, right? And the dome gives this sense again of heaven, of the heavenly reality with the angels and the saints coming down to earth. And one of the differences between Orthodox architecture and Western church architecture that's been noted is that you often see in Western architecture a church that kind of goes up with a spire, like it's pointing up there, whereas Orthodox architecture says, no, heaven's coming down here. And that's pretty important to us. So not all churches have domes, but that dome really has that function of creating that sense that this the kind of the descent of heaven. And there's the story. I don't know if you read it. Are you familiar with the story of Saint Vladimir of Kiev and his emissaries?
Yeah, I think I do.
Yeah, but that's the story. He sends out emissaries to all the different these different religions, and when his representatives go to Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, their impression was that we don't know whether we were in heaven or on earth, but where the Greeks worship, God dwells there. And that's a very important story for the conversion of Kiev, which was or Kiev, which is Ukraine. Ukraine really being the spiritual, or then the political home of the Rus, and that really the Rus incorporates Ukraine and Russia. So it's also called the baptism of Russia, and it kind of goes back to that story. Saint Vladimir's grandmother, Saint Olga, became actually a pretty dramatic conversion experience. She was pretty ruthless before she became Christian. And her grandson is the one that really brought the Rus into Christianity. So there was it left an impressive mark apparently on his ambassadors, and that's that meeting of heaven and earth. So we see the dome, and again, the apse is sort of a half dome, right? And it's sort of the same sort of sense of the circle and the square, of heaven coming down to earth and us being kind of lifted up into the heavenly reality.
About these windows, it seems like they're not like churches, like this church especially, doesn't really rely on natural light. The windows aren't very big, like you see in a lot of Catholic churches, and a lot of times there's not that many of them. So, what's the significance of that, or is it just architectural choice?
Yeah, I'm not sure how the weight is distributed in this church. So it might it really might be part of the function of the structure. But generally in Orthodox churches, we place windows above eye level, a little higher, or we make them so that you can't see through them. And part of that is not so as not to be distracted, right? Because Orthodox churches are supposed to have this otherworldliness, right? And it's interesting because in America, sometimes we go into churches and we feel like otherworldly in the sense of other cultures, right? You can go into a Greek church and they speak in Greek, or Arabic church, they speak Arabic. But typically it's not that. It's not into another, going into another human culture. It's really going into the kingdom of heaven. So they're supposed to give us a very different experience than we have in the world, right? And that's one reason we beautify them. Americans like to ask questions like, well, shouldn't we give that money to the poor? And it's like, well, for us, there's no contradiction. Yes, you should give money to the poor, right? Yes, you should take care of the widow and the orphan and the immigrant and all of that. And you should also beautify your temples, because that temple space belongs to everyone, whether they're rich or whether they're poor, right? But that's one way that the rich contribute to those who are poor. So because that we're all equal within the church, and it gives people that, people that don't have much money, for example, that want to have a wedding, you're going to have wedding in a beautiful place, right? Because of the beautification of the temple, and your wedding is just as beautiful as somebody who's wealthy. Sometimes wealthier people try to make it more beautiful, bringing in sometimes like audaciously huge flowers and things like that. But sometimes it actually kind of takes away from it. It's like, why are you like, it's unnecessary. Why are you doing that? Sometimes people just feel like they need to spend money, but that space, and it really belongs to everybody. So that's why we do that. Now, as far as the windows too, or going back to the windows, we just don't want to be distracted. Sometimes it's really incredible the way that light does come in at certain particular times, right? During the day, and it's amazing, even with high windows, sometimes it's just really beautiful, and you pay more attention to the light when it's like this too. When those beams of light come in on a sunny day, it's just amazing. It's like beams coming from heaven. It's really, really amazing. But at one of our churches here in Houston, the church I'm assigned to, St. George, we or the church I'm attached to technically at St. George, we have translucent windows that are made of white onyx. So it's actually thick stone, and they come all the way down to eye level, but you can't see through them, right? Because it's stone. But when it's really bright outside, I mean, it lights it up. I mean, it's absolutely, absolutely beautiful. So And we also use, so we do like natural light, but it's very strategically placed, those windows. And I don't know this, but I think Hagia Sophia, the way the dome was set, it had, kind of give the sense of it kind of like floating or something. I think I read that somewhere. And we have a lot of windows in the dome. It may, if you're there, it may kind of give you sort of that sense as well, sort of like this lightness, of the dome with all this, you know, all this, light coming through it. And it's also hard to get light up there. Sometimes domes can be really dark. So it's really, that's probably a function as well. It really looks illuminated. Some of that may be unnatural light as well. But we also like candles in the church. We use a lot of candles.
Yeah, and with all the apses as well, they it really does echo in these churches. It's such a big space, so it doesn't seem like it would echo that much, but it really does with all this. So how do they, or especially with just chanters and the choir, how do they utilize these to really project their voices without having to use a ton of technology like microphones and stuff?
Right. Acoustics is an interesting field, and I'm not an expert at all in acoustics. And there's every space, is a little bit different. And you can take two churches. I mean, just because you model this of Hagia Sophia doesn't mean it's going to have the same acoustics, like, because you make changes. And there is some difference of opinion, I think, in how much reverberation you should have. You kind of want, you really kind of want a sort of a warm sound. You don't want something that kind of is like unpleasantly bright, right? But at the same time, you really want to be able to hear. And it's sometimes difficult. A lot of our churches today have microphone systems, so we can sound systems with microphones, so people can hear us. There are places you don't want to be heard, like when you're doing confessions, right? So be careful. Some churches, like, you can whisper in a corner and you can hear it, so to be very careful, because there are sometimes that you want private space in the churches and you want silent space in the churches, and there are times you want to be able to hear. And it's also very difficult in big spaces when you have kids, right? Because if you have babies, they're going to cry. That's what they do. And it's been mine before. That's what happened. So ideally you would have kind of a space where you don't hear the congregation as much. I don't know if that's possible, but you do want to hear the choir. In Orthodoxy, the music is important because of the text, right? Because the music serves the text. So you want to be able to hear what the choir is singing clearly. And even more difficult sometimes, I mean, you want to hear the priest, who is most of the time facing the same direction as the people, right? So the priest is facing east like everybody else. So his face is away from the people, and the choir has to hear him because it's a dialogue and the people have to hear him. And also when the priest turns around and preaches, the people have to hear him. So acoustics are very interesting. And I think domes, how shallow the dome is and how high the dome is, a lot of that can affect the acoustics. I think you would want to check this with an acoustic person, but I think I heard someone say once that, like, when you build an apse, it's smart to not have like an absolute complete half circle, because your sound can kind of like stay there, but to kind of flatten a little bit so the sound bounces off and goes behind you, like where the people are, right? And you also have the iconostasis, which was just going to absorb some sound, but you don't want inevitably sometimes there's noise. Like, we have an army of altar servers at my parish. I mean, it's amazing, the number of altar servers every Sunday, being a very large parish, and you don't want to hear like them moving around, and there's a lot of things you don't want to hear. You can do some things with the sound. Having marble floors, which really having stone or marble is really ideal in a lot of ways, and for a lot of reasons in churches. It gives a sense of permanence and having, strong walls and everything. And you've got mosaics and a lot of hard surfaces. Um, and you if you have uh, some strategically placed rugs, like big like Oriental rugs, you can they help to absorb sound. So sometimes things like that help. If you have carpeted churches, it's very different, right? Because they just like absorb sound, and fabrics absorb sound, and it's very difficult because this church would probably sound a lot different, like it is empty or relatively empty. Then you get a lot of people there, right? The sound really changes when you get a lot of people. It's not as bright as it is. So it's interesting when we deal with sound systems. Um, you need to have somebody there to work on the acoustics when you're actually having a service, when it's full, because if they try to do it, when they do it like, so they think everybody can hear when nobody's there, and then nobody can hear when everybody is there. So it's really interesting, um, how wood and stone and those sort of things, even different kinds of wood, I think, whether it's like highly polished and varnished versus not, really has an effect on sound, and people have an effect on sound. So it's always it's kind of a challenge trying to work all of that out, because you can put acoustic panels in. There's a lot of things that you can do to try to absorb sound, or to try to magnify sound.
Okay, just one more question, because I think my time's about to run out. But yeah, this church has multiple different altars.
Mhm.
So what is that? Why isn't there just one altar?
Well, churches have chapels for different reasons, and some churches like will have chapels that are not part of the open space, because they're I mean, it's easier to cool it. So I've done this before at a church where during daily services, if we weren't going to have a lot of people, we would do it in more of a closed chapel, because then you didn't have to spend all this money heating or cooling this. Well, in Houston, cooling this enormous space, when you could just use a small one. But even in big churches like this, you can have a small chapel, and I'm not sure what this particular church uses it for, or where they do baptisms. I mean, if they have like small baptismals they could bring out, you could do a baptismal service here. It feels a lot more intimate, right? If you have like, if you're doing a service, let's say, and you have like in a large church, I mean, it's great when it's full, but if you have 15 people, it's just like, it's not very intimate, right? And people might even be spread out. So if you have a small group of people, I always loved it when I could do liturgy in a chapel with a small number of people doing it in the chapel, because you get just a sense of more, just kind of everybody being together. So if you did like if you had a baptism for just a family, this would be ideal, right? If you had certain weddings, like with only a few people, like this would probably be ideal too. So it really does kind of give it a sense of intimacy for a fewer number of people. There may also be this may be dedicated to a saint or something that's very important to the Serbian people. I don't see any particular patron saint there necessarily, but it might be dedicated to something specific that you would do a liturgy there during a particular time of year, or something like that. I mean, you could do